you in this vast multiverse.
Aloha and welcome to Ancient Oblivion. Today we're talking about the DOGMEN, legendary tribe of humanoid people that were said to have existed, that looked like humans except for they had the heads of a dog. We're going to get in depth, extremely in depth, into the reality behind these legendary tribes, specifically this one known as the Cynocephali, or the Kynocephali, however you'd like to say it. One of many legendary tribes of basically mutated humans that once existed, that were a very real part of life in the ancient world. And we're going to cover many different bases, as well as I'll be sharing with you, this entire presentation is basically an excerpt from my upcoming book, Return to Hyperborea, where I discuss the mysterious, legendary, and mythic forgotten island at the North Pole. Basically the cradle of civilization. This is just one portion of my book that I'll be presenting to you in a visual format. I hope everyone enjoys it today. I believe in myths. I believe that myths and legends are a reality that once existed, that time has basically erased, that we have forgotten about, that has been swept under the rug, or sometimes even hidden from us. So today we're going to be discussing the Cynocephali. And I believe in other ages, not just the modern age. I believe in ancient times, in times long past and long forgotten, hidden history, or what I call ancient oblivion. I believe in the plasma apocalypse, which is crucial and connected to all of the things, the mysteries of our world and the things that we've forgotten about in our modern age, and connects us with our ancient oblivion, as well as prophecy and the things that will return again in the future. So, as a part of these things, especially the plasma apocalypse, when our world is inundated with energy once more. Right now we live during a time where energy is being sucked down into the bowels of the earth, leaving us energyless, leaving us weak on the surface, and manifesting in things like disease and famine and the degradation of society. But we're going through a flux right now, an energetic fluctuation on the surface world, which is Mother Nature's way of saying she's getting ready to give birth to that energy once more and to fill the surface world where we live. When that happens, I believe that I have found good reason to see that that energy affects all life on the surface in different ways. One of the ways that it affects all life is through mutations, genetic mutations, and these occur in multiple forms and in different ways. Right now, I'm going to go ahead and get some pictures pulled up to share with everybody. Now, here is just an example. This is where we will begin today. This is just a small example. There's many pictures like this, and I'm sure the people that watch my channel have and do inevitably follow other channels that have discussed some of these. For example, these are all examples of legendary tribes of humanoids, mutated humanoids. On the right, over here we have the dog-headed tribe, and these were actually seen and described across time. They were put onto maps. Famous explorers and historians reference them as actual fact. Not as, well, they could be maybe monkeys, or people were stupid in times past and they didn't understand the different types of animals in this world. They were referenced as actual humans. that just looked much different than the modern age humans do today. We've got the Blemmies, we've got humans that were born with two heads. This still happens today. They're just they're more anomalous today. The cyclopses, the monopods, etc. And I believe there are good reasons, scientific reasons, why these beings surfaced, why they came back. And even if you look back into other tales of creation, like the Enuma Elish, or the stories of the Anunnaki, who came down into this world and were said to have something to do with creating the human species in this world. Even according to that story, the tradition goes that when they first started to manipulate the DNA of humans, they created mutants. And many different types of mutants, some of which worked and some of which didn't work so well. So, out of all of these different changes that occur after the plasma apocalypse, when we go through another epoch, another age in this world, and everything shifts, life as we know it, the modern age changes drastically and throws us back into Wonderland, into a time of magic, and a time that we have only recorded and kept preserved through our collective subconscious and movies and our creative minds and fiction and things like this. They're all real. They have substance to them. And that's why they appeal to people like myself so much. One of those changes arises from various tribes of humanoid mutants. For example, there were many different ones. Here's just a small list. You have the Blemmy, the monopods, the cyclopses, giants, the backwards leg tribe that had backwards legs, the pygmies, the pig people, stretchies. I just call them stretchies. People who had unbelievably stretchy skin, or stretchy powers, you could say. The breatharians, a tribe of humans, legendary tribe of humans who had no need to actually eat physical food. Instead, they were sustained through breathing. They would breathe and carry flowers with them, and they would gain substance and energy from that. Hey, thanks everyone in the live chat for all your support. I appreciate you. And there was many more. But today we're focusing on this one, the dog heads. And there's many different ways that these have been cartoonified and changed throughout the telephone game that we call time and history. The cynocephali, which basically translates to the dog-headed tribe. Now, let's start with this. As you can see, they put these legendary tribes of people on maps. Now, some people would just chalk this up to creativity, to fear, to wonder, to people in the ancient times not having the intellect that we do today. Because in today's modern world, we tend to attribute superiority to ourselves, intellectual superiority over those of the past, although we stand upon the shoulders of intellectual giants and wise men who came before. And although our society seems to be degrading intellectually, we defy that. And we refuse to see what's obvious, which is, intellectually speaking, we're on the decline. When in times past, we were bigger, we were healthier, we were stronger, we were more intellectual, and we lived much longer. So, mainstream academics does not believe in the supernatural or the paranormal. I do. They do not discuss apocalyptic events happening to humans, unless of course they're hypothesizing hundreds of thousands or millions of years into the future or back into the past. They insist that people were dumb in the past, comparatively speaking, and that our intellect today is superior. They say that the dog-headed people were monkeys, mistaken for humans. We're going to take a look at that, and we're going to examine that. Here's some examples of how they put these people and tribes onto ancient maps. Not just for fun, not just maps that were just haphazardly drawn by any old person, but maps that were commissioned by kings, queens, and popes under the penalty of eternal hellfire from God and the death penalty from those same nobles, as well as ridicule and losing their cartography jobs if they were to purposefully lie or mislead the people by putting things on maps that did not exist. So keep that in mind as well. So we're going to get into their descriptions, but first let's talk about what they are not. Now, if you look up the dog-headed people, the dog-headed tribe, most people, most academically minded people, will just attribute it to these right here, baboons, or different types of monkeys, or possibly kangaroos and stuff like that. So we're going to look at the descriptions of the dog-headed tribes according to ancient historians and explorers who saw these tribes of people themselves and knew others who had met them and encountered them and even gone to war with them, traded with them, converted them to their religious belief systems. And we're going to compare that to modern day monkeys. We're also going to ask ourselves the question, if I lived hundreds of years ago, or even 1,000 years ago, would I recognize that this right here is an animal? Or would I be mistaken because I'm not as intellectually as advanced, and I would think that that's just a human that just looks strange. Something's wrong with that human. Is that what you see? That's not what I see. When I look at these animals, they clearly look and appear and act animalistic. They don't walk upright and wear clothing and have religions and, put themselves into the limelight of humanity and interact with humanity. They tend to be and stay within the animal world. So I'm not convinced at all. And I have much better theories about who the dogmen were. As a matter of fact, sometimes and oftentimes I've found that you can find depictions of the dog-headed tribe right along with actual monkeys and dogs. Real monkeys and dogs that they drew because they knew what they were. Oftentimes people drew exactly what they saw. If you look back at the ancient cave paintings, the oldest cave paintings on record that we have found, that humanity has found so far, are pretty good, accurate depictions of animals and beasts and other things that they saw, right? They knew how to draw different types of animals that they interacted with and came across. So, let's talk about their descriptions. Here's one example right here, right? And keep in mind, many of these, even when they show you an actual human with a dog's head, they're still cartoonified. So many of these came out of the Dark Ages, which we've done a whole discourse on, about 2 or 3 different episodes, the season of Satan, discussing the Dark Ages and the time whenever the light actually emerges and is born out of the world, terrestrial beams of energy, likely, I've found, to be ionized oxygen that replenishes and resupplies our world, bequeathing attributes unto us like longer lifespans and cellular regeneration and better health and eradicating disease. But there's also some other side effects like mutation. Now, take a look at this. As you can see just from this one example here, they almost always draw the dog-headed tribe, the people of the dog-headed tribe, which we're going to focus on the men of that tribe. I'll tell you why here in just a minute, because there's actually an island specifically of men and an island of women. We're going to talk about that here in a minute. But notice how they put clothing on the dog-headed people. If these were monkeys, why would they be walking around wearing clothing? And oftentimes, it was noted by these historians and explorers and other notable people of ancient times that they didn't just wear any old common loincloths. They wore clothes that were fitting of nobles and had nobles amongst their own tribes. They were often described as being very tall as well, even giants sometimes. We're going to take a look at an example of a giant that's a famous example within Christianity, actually, or Catholicism specifically. So they were very tall. And another notable feature, especially notable, is that they were hairy all over. Hence the dog, right? Now, sometimes you may see these images, and some people, this is interpretation. This is perception filters. This is that telephone game of time as we go through time, and how history can change things based on people's way of life and their understanding and their own personal experiences, right? Our perception filters sort of flavor the truth, I'll say. Now, some people may look at this particular example, which is just a cartoonified example, and they may see a bear person. Some other people might see a rat person. Others may see a pig person, etc. It all depends on your perspective. But take a look here. Oftentimes, they were actually shown handling instruments and tools, right? If they were monkeys, then they would not have opposable thumbs and be pictured walking around with axes and whatnot. And also, you'll notice in this picture right here, you can see there's actually a dog in the background, right? Oops. So here's the dog-headed person, and there's an actual dog in the background behind him. You can see that they pictured him with an axe with cut down trees in the background, like they were cutting down trees in order to build, which is usually what trees are cut down for. Pardon me. They were also said to follow religions, that they had their own religion. Now, I have various quotes I'll be sharing with you from these different people of times past in regards to the dog-headed tribe. And one of the things that they said is that they had their own religion. And I'm going to talk about how some of the outside tribes of humans, looking more like us, tried to convert them, actually. And one time, a famous time, they were successful in that. So in their religion, they worshipped the bull god. And this bull god, they would actually draw the symbol of the bull on their forehead, which would be like a circular, with horns sticking up out of it. That's very interesting to me, especially, I'll probably bring that up when we break down this new movie that just came out on Netflix called Three Body Problem, because it totally relates to that. And it relates to the signs and symbols of plasma that are seen up in the air during the plasma apocalypse and during the next era that we go into, when people can see different things up there in the atmosphere as our atmosphere changes and the atmospheric conditions in this world change. So they followed a religion. They had their very own religion. Do monkeys have a religion? Has anyone ever seen a monkey or a dog going to church or putting on a cross or walking around with religious symbols? No, not really. I haven't. So they worshipped the bull god, and they wore its mark on their foreheads. They were known as being exceedingly strong, carrying around clubs and tools, etc. You'll notice that this one actually looks like Goofy, which is probably where Goofy comes from. I want to say thanks to everyone in the chat again. I super appreciate all of your support. So many people have asked, what kind of animal is Goofy? Is Goofy a dog? Because Pluto's a dog, and he coexists with Goofy. Goofy is a type that has been passed down through our collective subconscious of DOGMEN, the dog-headed tribe. Now, I want to say right now, I do not believe, nor have I found any evidence to support the fact that, or the supposed fact that there were humans that actually had the heads of dogs, that they were part dog and part human. I don't believe that. I don't see any reason to believe that quite yet. But I'm going to give you my theory on what they actually were, what possible substance there was to people looking at these humans and saying, "Oh my God, it's like a dog person," right? So they were said to be extremely tall, hairy all over. They had their own religion. They were exceedingly strong. And this, by the way, right here, where they show you what he's wearing, that's not like, this is just cartoonified. This is his actual body covered in hair, which there was some other legendary tribes that were said to be just extremely shaggy and just covered in hair. We'll get back to that. I'll tell you why I believe that they were covered in so much hair. Here are some other examples, many different examples. These things were drawn all over the place in the Middle Ages and afterwards. They were typically dressed in clothing, even fine clothing, as discussed, and they communicated with outsiders. They were known to possess various spices that were desired by the outside tribes, and by outside tribes I mean like us, people in what I call the Southlands. And so they would trade with them too, carefully trading with them, because they were also seen as savages and barbaric because of their ways. But their ways were normal to them. They typically wore clothing, even fine clothing. They communicated with outsiders. Now, take a look down here, too. See this one right here? In this one, they look like moose people or horse people, which reminds me of Gulliver's Travels. If you have read the entire story, Gulliver doesn't just go to the island of Lilliput, where the Lilliputians are real tiny and Gulliver's seen as a huge titan. He goes to 2 other islands as well. The last one he goes to is an island of horse people. It's very interesting. I believe it's actually related to this. These dog-headed tribal members were said to have lived on an island that was surrounded by lofty cliffs. They were said to be unbeatable in war, because nobody could take their island, because they lived in order to get onto their island, you would have to climb these sheer-faced cliffs, which I believe is directly related to plasma volcanoes, right? So if you're unfamiliar with the concept, basically in the middle of our world lies the greatest mountain in the world. It is a plasma volcano. It's actually a volcano, and all volcanoes are plasma volcanoes when we go into the next cycle. Right now, they're different. They're lava volcanoes. But whenever the conditions in our world change and we go through an energetic reversal, those volcanoes emit energy, right? And whenever they do that, they actually electromagnetically draw Earth to them, and that's why they're created in that cone shape. They lift the land up into the air and petrify the mud and other substance that gets drawn into them, creating volcanoes that emit this ionized oxygen. And on these islands that have these plasma volcanoes, specifically at the North Pole, you have Mount Meru in the center. And then my hypothesis is that there is an anode and a cathode island. Anode and cathode, plus and minus, you could say, positive and negative energy, that also comes up from subsequent volcanoes on either side of Mount Meru. And those are inhabited by people, or tribes of people. People that we are not familiar with, that only survive in our legends and myths, and I'm going to talk about and connect both of them today. So they lived on an island surrounded by lofty cliffs. They were also known to have split feet. Now this is really interesting, and I've got some great examples of this too. Now you can see here in this picture, they often caught these dogmen, and they would bring them to their nobility. They would become prisoners of war, or sometimes they were actually enlisted in their armies. If they could be converted, if they were convinced that they weren't complete savages. There are many accounts of these dog-headed men that left their tribe in order to fight for the outsiders in their war. They wore armor, they had weapons and everything. Could that be monkeys or baboons? I don't think so. They were said to have these split feet. I think I actually have an example. Here's them worshiping the bull god. Let me show you this example of their split feet. I'll come back to these other pictures here in a second. There we go. So they're drawn in different ways over time, right? Here's a stone cut drawing, basically, of what you have like the Anunnaki gods on either side, and then you have an example of what looks to be a dog-headed tribal member. But look at the feet. Now let me zoom out a bit so you can see the feet here. Now there you see that at the bottom? Sometimes they were described as having birds' feet. Other times it was the feet of cows or bovine feet. That means that they were split, that their feet looked like this. If I had only two fingers here, and then they were just split off, that's kind of what their feet were said to look like. So sometimes they were described as having birds' feet, sometimes as having goats' feet, or the feet of calves, or some other form of split foot. Now, genetically speaking, this is something that we experience in the modern world. Just like people growing horns, which I'll show you in a bit later, or people growing excessive amounts of hair, people also have had bird feet. And these are modern pictures of actual people And sometimes it's in their entire families. You can look this up on Google and find this easily, as I have. It's a split foot condition. This is also shown to you in some movies. They allude to this too, specifically, fantasy movies and stuff. Let me get back to this main picture here. There we go. All right, so they had split feet, traditionally, and opposable thumbs, obviously, so that they could handle weapons and tools and things like that. They were sometimes enlisted in the armies of the outsiders, as discussed. They're oftentimes depicted as hanging around Jesus. This is very interesting, right? Dogs are talked about in the Bible. They're referenced as a metaphor. Not as actual dogs, as pets or creatures that walk around on all fours, but we'll come back to that one because it's a very interesting description. They used tools, they hunted, they were said to farm, to grow rice and other grains and stuff, and they were cannibalistic. They were famously known for being cannibalistic, which is one of the reasons why they were seen as being such savages. Right? They would eat their own children. They would definitely eat anyone that they came across in war, and they killed their enemies or their adversaries. Whether if they were humanoid, then they were seen as being cannibalistic. Right? Not just that they ate their own kind, but they ate humans, which made them cannibals, which indicates that they were humans or humanoid. Right? Not that they were baboons or apes or kangaroos or any such sort of animal. They were intelligent as well. Now, I read this interesting story, an account where people had gone to war against the dog-headed tribe who were covered in all of this shaggy hair all over their bodies. And in order to create a type of armor, they lived in an area, or when this war had happened, they were in an area that was very cold, which to me indicates a northern area. So what they did, according to the legend, is these dog-headed tribal members, covered in fur or hair or whatnot, all over their bodies, went and they jumped into the freezing cold waters to drench themselves. Then when they came out, that water almost instantly froze, and then they would go back into the water and get another layer that would freeze, and they would do this a few different times in order to create natural forms of armor out of ice. And then they would go to war. And then the blades of the enemies would just glance right off of their bodies. That to me suggests intelligence, if anything else. It's very interesting that there's a connection to the word canine. The word dog is God backwards, which is interesting in and of itself. But the word canine, which means dog, sounds like there's a relation to the word Canaan, as in the biblical city of Canaan or Canaan, or that A-N at the end means of the. It could also possibly mean sky, but I believe it's more likely to mean of the. So, Kanaon, which means of the priests, those who were the priests of their god, which was Baal, which is the bull god, one of its many forms, which is very interesting. So, the Canaan, or the Canines, or the Canaanites, possibly could have been the dog-headed tribe. Now, it's interesting, too, because there's a story where King David in the Bible famously goes and he fights against a giant who is enlisted in the Canaanite army. At least that giant was in the land of Canaan at the time. He might not have been from there. But what this giant says to King David is, "Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks?" That's an interesting thing to say, especially given the correlation between the Canaanites, or the Cains, those of Cain, basically, the dog-headed people, and him being called a dog. Perhaps that was an insult, right? Just like we would find it an insult to some of us if we were to be called monkeys. Let's say an alien race came down and they were like, oh, you just a bunch of monkey people. That would be seen as an insult. Just like if we were to call these people dogs or dog-headed, they would find that to be an insult if they were not actually animals, if they were humans that just happen to resemble dogs, right? That's interesting, and perhaps that's actually what the mark of Cain was. Many people wonder about what the mark of Cain was, right? And there's different theories, and I've heard many interesting ones, but maybe this is the mark of Cain. I'll show you here in just a minute what I mean. I'll be more direct in my theory. So here's some more examples of the dog-headed tribes going to war, invading castles, riding upon horses, which are animals, right? Wearing crowns, having weapons, holding on to lances, talking to one another. Here they are again, as it looks like they're worshiping here in the background, and this looks like there's an actual dog down here eating this soldier, if you could see him down there. See how this dog right here has actual paws, whereas the dog-headed tribe is portrayed as having hands. Another example where dogs or monkeys are shown at the same time as the actual dog-headed tribe, right? Now, sometimes they were depicted as being civil. Sometimes they were depicted as being able to carry on conversations and learning English, and they had their own language, right? Which to outsiders just sounded like grunting and barking, so to speak, right? Especially if you see them as dog people, which was sort of, I imagine, a derogatory term to call them as your enemies. But other times they were shown their other side, which is when they ate their enemies, right? Not letting that flesh go to waste or whatnot. Here they are again in battle, dressed up, wearing armor, holding on to weapons, fighting against knights, etc. We talked about the bird feet thing, so we'll skip on that one. They were often put into rock carvings, put onto the actual walls of churches and other buildings. This was recorded for posterity, that these were actual real humans. This is not guessing. This is not just a myth. And I certainly will not minimize it, especially given this much weight, this much weighty evidence that has survived the test of time, where people were putting these as sculptures right next to saints and Jesus and the constellations, etc., right? On many of these ancient structures. There are many myths and legends in various of the world's, historic records and religions that talk about humans turning into dog-like creatures, or especially wolves. They were seen as turning into wolves, which takes us also to the wolfmen, which I'll get to here in a minute, or the werewolves. Right? This one in particular, I believe, there's a legend of the king of Arcadia. The king of Arcadia was seen to be corrupt after some time, and the story goes that he invited Zeus to come to his house for dinner, and he served up his own son. Cooked him up, served him for dinner, and Zeus was so appalled that he changed the man instantly into a dog-headed person, into a wolf man. And this is recorded in our history. Now, this is an interesting relief. This is an interesting drawing that's on this wall. This is in Greece. So for the people that would say, well, the Greece people, they never saw monkeys or baboons or any of that stuff, so they just invented the dog-headed people as a way of reconciling seeing these monkeys. This is an actual building from ancient Greece that has survived the test of time, which is decked out and covered with monkeys all over the place. You can clearly see them. So they knew what monkeys were, and they knew the difference between humans and monkeys. The Egyptians as well also knew what a baboon was, as you can see here. They drew pictures and had glyphs of different animals. So when they combined those animals and they put the head of a baboon onto a human, or what appears to be a baboon, it's a cartoonified metaphor. It's a simile. It's an example of an actual truth. It's something that I call cartoonification. Okay? So there are these dog-headed tribes. Some people, ancient historians, have described them as looking like Saint Bernards in the face. So this is very interesting to me as well. Let's check out a couple more of these drawings here. You can see some more up here. They're talked about all over the place, from ancient China to India. Now, the stories of them originating in India, to me, is very interesting, because these ancient stories that mention India, I don't believe that the modern places we have in antiquity were the places that were discussed. So, for example, the modern-day Euphrates in the Middle East near Saudi Arabia. I don't believe that is the original Euphrates River, nor do I believe the Tigris, its counterpart, is the original Tigris. I believe, especially, there's so many different reasons for that, and I do go over that extensively in my upcoming book, as well as the Garden of Eden and its actual location and things like that. But just like the Euphrates in the Middle East of today is not the original Euphrates, but it was named in honor of that great river where these people had come from, bringing their names and their traditions and their place names and their stories into a new land, and then projecting that upon the new land to sort of preserve their heritage and to create a sense of familiarity with their new lands that they inhabited. Here's the dogmen in the back, just in case you were looking here. I'll zoom in a bit so you can see them. Now, this one's interesting. Not only do you have the actual dog-headed tribal members over here, you've got dragons walking around, tall, slender, giant-looking people, a unicorn, which was, at the very least, a real animal. I don't believe it's just some strange type of a goat or whatever. I believe the unicorns were real, and I believe I've shown many different examples of that. The pygmies, etc. Over here, it looks like there actually might be monkeys. I can't tell what these are supposed to be. Here's another one where they drew the dog-headed people on the wall. Look what this guy is holding. Something that looks like the staff of Hermes. You have this sort of beam that shoots up with these serpentine objects off to the left and the right, like the rod of Hermes, right? Which that is the beam that comes up out of Mount Meru. This is very interesting too. So there's this energy that shoots up out of Mount Meru at the center of the world. And then we have Anode and Cathode islands off to the side. Then there's other plasma volcanoes as well. That's why that whole area is called Septentrion, because there's actually 7 that surround it. But you have all of these different plasma volcanoes that are emitting energy up into the air. That energy fluctuates because it's a fluid, and it interacts with the fluid that we call the atmosphere. So at first, it's a beam of light. It's a straight line. But after a while, it becomes serpentine and snake-like as it starts to find its currents and move about in the air. So, speaking of that, we have the Anode and the Cathode islands. And I'm going to talk about those for just a second, right? One of them, so you have Mount Meru, which is the biggest plasma volcano in the world, and it shoots up a beam of light that goes straight up into the heavens and then splits off as it gets to the top. This is the tree of life. Now, you have a positive on the other side and a negative on the other side, I suppose. Okay, right? There may be more to it. You know, I'm still working many things out myself as to my own theories on this. But let's suppose that they have an island of plasma volcanoes, one being purely negative, right? And the other being purely positive, an anode and a cathode. And those can actually reverse depending on the different ages that we're in. They can reverse, and one can be the anode and the other one can be the cathode. But those inhabitants that are born on those islands, it seems reasonable to me to suppose that if that island, the actual land where they live, is emitting a strong, positive male force, that most of the inhabitants of that island would be male and very masculine. And on the other side, contrary-wise, we would have an island of purely females and mostly females, at least during the times whenever those beams are shooting up into the sky and the entire area, the entire region is resonating with that positive or negative energy. Which brings us to the Anode and the Cathode Islands. One, mostly male. Very strong, dominant male energy. And all of those people and creatures are resonating with that. So when they give birth, right? Then they give birth to that same male energy, which will produce an excessive amount of testosterone. Now, what happens whenever an excessive amount of testosterone is produced in the body? Here you can see they look more like pig people, actually. And I may do a video on pig people in the future, too. That's an interesting topic. Man, do we talk about Saint Christopher right now? Should I pause on that? Yeah, let's pause. Let's talk about this guy. Okay, I'll come back to the Anode and the Cathode Islands, okay, and to my theory. But right now I want to talk about Saint Christopher. Here you can see this is an actual Christian saint, and this is how he was depicted in the ancient times, time and time again. In the modern world, typically they have sort of given him a makeover and made him look like a regular Caucasian, basically, but not in ancient times. In ancient times, Saint Christopher was drawn like this. He had the head of a wolf. He had the head of a dog, or it looks like a horse or a rat or something like that. And he was said to be a giant. He was said to have exceptional strength, which, by the way, the closer the humanoid tribes live to Mount Meru and to that mysterious island at the north, the longer their lifespans and the stronger they tend to be. This is interesting. Now, you'll notice a few different things. One, check it out. He's got pointy hair. He's very swarthy or dark in complexion. He's basically hairy all over. Okay, it's hard to figure that out because of all the clothing and whatnot. But he's got these long, pointy ears. He's got long, flowing hair. He was said to be a giant. And his story goes that at first, he was seen as somebody that basically worshipped the devil or Satan, or an evil god. And he wanted to worship, he was innocent, he just wanted to worship whoever was the most powerful. So, and I'm telling this story or retelling it in my own words, okay? He just wanted to worship the most powerful entity, because to him that made the most sense. And to me, that makes the most sense as well. So, whenever you had these Christian missionaries, these outsiders, regular-looking humans, that came upon Saint Christopher before he was dubbed such, he had a discussion with them, and they asked him, why are you worshiping this evil creation or whatnot, right? And he said, well, it's the most powerful one that I've heard of. Everybody's afraid and terrified of Satan, etc., so I might as well worship him. And those, I'm sure he didn't say Satan. I'm just using that so you can understand we're talking about good and evil, right? Or positive and negative forces, etc. Anyways, so these Christian missionaries are like, there's a way more powerful God. And Satan is subject to this God. As a matter of fact, whenever you talk about the son of this God, people will make the sign of the cross, and people who are satanic, they become terrified and spirits run away. And so he was compelled. And he was interested in this story, and he sought out this God, and he became famously known as a convert, who was a dog-headed tribe, a dogman, who was known as being a savage of those who were cannibals and practiced witchcraft and magic and sorcery and cannibalism and other such, so-called horrendous things. But he was converted famously, and he became a Christian saint. And he was extremely tall and extremely strong, and he asked, what should I do? How can I help? I don't know how to help the people. And so they recommended that he carry people across this river or stream that was pretty deep in one spot. Because he was so tall, he could just put people up on his shoulder and walk them across the river. So we're talking about giants. These dog-headed men may have been gigantic. So Saint Christopher, he was renamed Saint Christopher, which means Christ bearer. The story goes that one day he was carrying these people across the river, different people every day in service to God. And then this child comes, and he takes the child, and as he's going across, the child gets heavier and heavier, and he's like, oh my God. And he gets to the other side, he almost drowned. The child became so heavy. And he asks him, he said, why did it become so heavy and such a burden? You're such a small child. It's like I was carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders. And it was Jesus. And the child, Jesus says, you were carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders. It was me. And that's an interesting story of Saint Christopher, the dog-headed saint, who was converted to Catholicism, or Christianity, we'll say, who was known to be exceptionally strong, have superhuman strength, and to be gigantic. This is very interesting. Would that be a baboon? Would people actually try to convert a baboon, or a kangaroo, or some sort of animal? I don't think so. So here's many different depictions of Saint Christopher, dressed up in fine clothing, associated with other Christian saints, wearing armor, holding on to spears and weapons with halos drawn around his head. Many different images and pictures of this dog-headed tribal member who went around the world trying to help people, just wanting to serve the strongest and mightiest of all of the gods. I like this depiction here too. Notice how the mouth protrudes. We're going to talk about that here towards the end as well. But here's this. This is supposed to be him carrying the child Jesus on his shoulders across the river. Now, getting back to the dog-headed tribe, right? They didn't have the heads of dogs, of actual dogs. Okay, they weren't a crossbreed between canines and humans. It was just a derogatory term. It was just, they look like dogs, so we call them dogs. Probably like the fish gods were probably those who had scaly skin, looked like fish because fish have scales. Or how about reptilians who have scaly skin? So they call them, oh, you're the reptilians. Maybe not. Maybe that's just a cartoonification. Maybe that's just an easy way of describing them. Just like the dog-headed people, right? The dog-headed people also were famously said to live in caves and to make their homes within caves, that they didn't build a lot of like outdoor houses. If they did, they were more like huts. So they found their protection and many of their homes within caves. Now this right here is an image of the Sistine Chapel. Right? You know that famous image where God is reaching out to touch and Adam's holding his finger out, which is up on the roof? This is the same Sistine Chapel. In front of you is a statue of Jesus Christ. And there is a whole mural of interesting things happening during this apocalyptic event right behind him. Let's look a little bit closer. And in a cave right behind Jesus, we find dogmen, or what appeared to be some sort of cynocephaly. They're covered in hair, they're swarthy, they look like Bigfoot, they have protruding mouths, and look at the feet. The feet actually match up. Let me zoom out a bit. Actually, let me zoom in all the way, see if I can really show you the feet here. You see that? That's the bird foot thing that I was showing you earlier, right? Where they were said to have those split feet like calves or like birds. So, this is very interesting to me that we have these humanoid hairy creatures, giant hairy creatures who walked about. And they were seen to be, or at least it seems to me, to be implied that they had a lot of testosterone. That they were very sexually active, that they would take women, etc. They were often drawn, just like this, going and stealing women, or not always kidnapping them. Sometimes they enticed them, which we'll talk about too. They weren't always seen as horrific monsters, but very manly and attractive at times, depending on, your preferences or whatnot. So here we have some more examples of these giant hairy men with hair all over their bodies, almost like it's fur, almost like they're animals, but they're not, they're people. And they would grab these women and they would procreate. Now, it's not just the men. The women also, we have many different examples throughout history in various texts and books that have been preserved and fallen to us here of women, wild women who were hairy all over from top to bottom. And as you can see, they were often welcome by the men of the time. Wild women, hairy women, who had so much hair that it was basically a type of clothing to them. They didn't really often need to wear clothing. And you can see some of these images here of the wild men, the dogmen, carrying clubs, their tools, the women covered in hair, except for, genitalia, certain parts of the body or whatnot, right? Here's another example of a wild woman and family with the man covered in hair, top to bottom, just like are drawn with the dogmen, covered in hair all over the place. And they had families and they had children. But traditionally, on this island of dogmen, that is masculine energy, just abundant in male energy, right? It would cause a lot of testosterone in the body, which in turn would cause a lot of hair to start growing, an abundance of it all over the place. So sometimes it may have been difficult for outsiders to even differentiate between the males and the females because they were both, masculine in nature, you could say, or at least they have hair all over. Like, if you think of a woman having a beard, typically, at least, a decade ago, it would have been seen as very manly or masculine, right? This one's very interesting as they have this wild woman with a unicorn, and this is how the outsiders would actually kill unicorns. They would have these people who are deemed to be very innocent energetically, and the unicorns would be attracted to them, and then the knights of the Middle Ages, they would come and kill the unicorns. There's a legend. This is interesting in New York. A hairy legend, first cited August 18th, 1926. The hairy women of Klipnaki, once young girls, inhabit this forest, waiting for their parents to return. People have seen these hairy people, often gigantic, tall, large, hairy men or hairy women that seem to hide and make their abode within forests and cave systems. They were depicted and drawn on many medieval works. This one's interesting. They have this bird, looks like it's about to reach down and grab somebody. Here you can see the knights fighting against them. The Middle Ages are of particular interest to me, or the Dark Ages especially. The Dark Age to Middle Age times were especially interesting, that you have all of these knights in the armor. We talk about that quite often here on my channel. But this is a time whenever fantastic beasts roam this world. Not just humanoid and legendary tribes of humans, but actual monstrous creatures. And also, if you pay attention to these trees that you often see in the background, it looks like they had a strange type of flora as well. This one right here reminds me of King Nebuchadnezzar in the Bible, right? I actually have the quote from the Bible right here regarding King Nebuchadnezzar. So it says here, King Nebuchadnezzar had this prophetic dream, which was basically apocalyptic in nature, where the world tree was cut down. And thus it brought famine and pestilence and death and stuff like that. So it says here in about Nebuchadnezzar, in the dream, the king sees a great tree that grows tall and strong, reaching to the heavens and visible to the ends of the earth. However, a holy one descends from the heavens and declares that the tree will be cut down and its branches stripped, leaving only the stump, the plasma volcano. The same hour was the thing fulfilled upon Nebuchadnezzar. So that same hour this happened to this king. And he was driven from men, and he ate grass like an ox, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven. Which I go into extensive detail in my new book about, by the way, the dew of heaven. Until his hairs were grown like eagle's feathers, and his nails like bird's claws. A human transformed, mutated into this hairy, monstrous beast of a man. This is so interesting to me. Let's take a look at these. Sometimes they won't put an actual snout or a dog face on the people. Sometimes they just draw them as overgrown with hair all over the place, right? Usually with very long beards. This is the concept of the wild man, right? The wild man that has exceedingly long hair all over his body. Now, if you're from an island that is energetically charged in the positive or male, and you resonate with that, which all things on that island likely would, then you would have an abundance of testosterone, and there's other things as well. But here you can see it's just like he's got almost like hair that's like bird feathers all over him, right? But this wild man image, right, where they're overgrown with hair all over, so much that they really don't even need clothing. Imagine that if they walked around, and here's another one with him next to an actual monkey, by the way. Imagine that they walked around and they just, I mean, some of these men may have cared. Some of them may have shaved, just like men today do, right? When I grew up in the 90s, it was a thing where having hair, you know, was just disgusting and gross and strange. And we go through these different cycles, right, of what's acceptable and what's popular and what's seen as sexy or not sexy, right? So sometimes people would shave their hair, especially if they had an abundance of it and it was growing all over the place. Today, people have some people have very hairy backs or all on their waists or legs and arms, etc. And they will shave it all off because they're very insecure. And they're like, oh, society tells me that this is disgusting and gross and I'll look like an animal and I'll look like a dog man. And I don't want that. But that wasn't always the case. Here you can see he's actually gigantic in comparison to this knight. Twice the size of a regular knight, which is why people like Goliath would have been sought out and recruited to fight for the armies of the outsiders. Because these were gigantic people who were from an anode and cathode island near to the North Pole. Not at the actual island of the North Pole itself, but just outside of it, or just outside of the holy city, you could say. Ancient Jerusalem, at the middle of the world. Here's another one. This one is what appears to be a wild woman. And there's the unicorn, once more, with the wild woman. But imagine that these people let themselves go. Imagine they walked about and went off by themselves and they left their society. Just like how sometimes we have people that go off grid and they leave their, cities and whatnot. And these people just let themselves grow and their hair grow and everything. And pretty soon, and imagine they're gigantic as well. I can see that like moss and stuff would probably start growing on their very hairy bodies, which would turn it green. And they could possibly actually be seen as being different colors instead of just dark and brown and swarthy looking or whatnot. This one actually looks like a woman that maybe dyed her hair green. That's interesting. But notice that she's suckling this baby right here, the baby suckling from her, which that reminds me of the founders of Rome, or the alleged founders of Rome, which is basically Ram or Ram. Remember how they worshipped the bull god, or the horned god, right? So the founders of Rome, Romulus and Remus, both of those basically mean ram, or the horned one. They were said as babies and as children to have been found by a human, and they survived. Something happened to their parents, and they were brought up by a wolf, a she-wolf. And there's famous pictures of Romulus and Remus being raised. This one says Romulus and Remus discovered by a gentle shepherd, and you see this wolf. Take a look. These are all cartoonified drawings, of course, right? But look at this one, right? Typically, you have, when they show you Romulus and Remus, they just show like an actual regular wolf on all fours, and they're just sort of underneath like little puppies or whatever. I don't really buy that story. That it literally happened that a dog or a wolf suckled these children, these babies or whatnot, because, they're humans. They need to drink a lot of milk. And what happened to the rest of those cubs, right? But this one is interesting because this reminds me of like Little Red Riding Hood or the Big Bad Wolf, dressing up, all these wolves dressing up in human clothing. This is a cartoonification of someone, a female from the dog-headed tribe, who is taking care of these outsiders, these twins of the outside world, right? This is how it's typically portrayed, is you have this strange-looking she-wolf, and then Romulus and Remus are just down there as little babies. To me, this is a cartoonification of the truth, which is a human suckles a human raises a human, etc. Right? If they're actual wolves, they probably would have just eaten Romulus and Remus. You know what I mean? Especially, you know, same thing with Mowgli, right? In the Jungle Book, Mowgli raised by wolves. Were they actual wolves, or were they of the dog-headed tribe? This one's interesting too. You can see that they depict the wild men, the dogmen basically, as having body parts that are cut off, but they still seem to be alive. And this guy has his head cut off, he's decapitated, and yet he's walking around with his own head. This guy's got his leg cut off, he's walking around. This to me indicates amplification of the spirit, spiritual energetic amplification. Those who live closest to these terrestrial beams of energy or light or spirit, which is basically what it is, they have their spirits amplified. So, for example, I talked about why they had so much torture during the Dark Ages and the Middle Ages, and how there's all these various hundreds of examples of people that could not die. They could not be killed while they were being tortured. Things that normally would kill your average human, these people were laughing at it, cracking jokes, unaffected. They could not feel pain, right? And oftentimes you actually had to cut their heads off in order to finish the job. So I theorize that these tribes on the Anode and Cathode Island, being that they lived much longer, they were very healthy, etc., that they also would have had those types of benefits imparted to them. Now, this is also very similar to the Green Man, which I sort of alluded to earlier, but let's imagine that you have hair, and it covers your face, and it covers your body all over the place, and then you're out in the wild walking around, especially if it's damp, especially if you live during a time after the apocalypse when you have atmospheric depressurization worldwide that rips the air apart and causes fog and mist to just appear all over the place. You would have a lot of moss growing all over the place. And then if you have hair all over your body and you're sleeping outside and you're gigantic, then it stands to reason it's going to be growing on you, which gives us the Green Man, the Jolly Green Giant. It's also how it's portrayed here. You can see just carrying around trees. These clubs that they carry were basically trees, right? It's an easy weapon for them. Just pluck a tree right up out of the ground. And you can see there were certain parts of their body that tend to be bare, like the kneecaps, the breasts, the hands, etc., right? But here's an example. I want you to keep this in mind. Now, I'm going to get more into my theory about the dogmen and what they actually were. This right here, this image, and the Green Man with all of the leaves and stuff that are spread across his face, all green, is directly related to the dogman, I believe, or the dog tribe. The dog-headed tribe. So here's an example of one of them walking around hairy all over, crawling on his arms and legs. Here's an example of one standing up. And then you have these two interesting characters off to the sides. Let's take a look as we transition into more of a realistic approach to what the dogmen actually were. These people are real people that existed, dressed as nobles, that had hair all over their face, cheeks all the way, hair all the way up to the eyeballs, hair coming up off of the nose and all over their foreheads. Here's another example. A famous person who rubbed elbows with nobility, had a wife and everything, and he was well respected in the world at the time. And he looked like a werewolf. He looked like a wolfman. This is a realistic portrait, an actual drawing of this person. I forget his name. But here's another image of the same guy with, you can see his hands are bare, just like on that other one of the green man, but his face is covered in hair. And notice how the hair spreads out, right? So if you had hair all over your face, right? So for example, take me. I've got a beard. I've got hair here and here, but it stops right here, and there's places where it does not grow. This is called hypertrichosis. This is an actual genetic condition, which is just something that's locked away in your genes, in some of your genes. Some of you have this. Some of you have the potential for this, I should say. Okay? And in some family members, it creeps out from time to time. Some people might get patches in certain places or whatnot, right? That's because we're not in that age yet. But when we go into that age and your junk DNA becomes activated once more, the world will change drastically. So imagine he was a wild man and he didn't have all these fine nobility clothings and he was out hiding in the forest. And let's say, I mean, you could see him as the wild man, the green man, and he would obviously move that hair out of his face so he could see, and it would look like leaves and moss and stuff as his body is green and covered in foliage, or it looks like it, right? Or you would see him as being the wolf man, a werewolf. Hey, thanks for all the support. You guys are awesome. Super appreciate you. Here's another example. This is real. These are real drawings that were done where people posed who had hypertrichosis. Hypertrichosis is a condition. Remember how I said if you live in that anode or the anode and cathode regions up there, if you live in the one that's positively charged, which is a lot of male energy, then it would obviously resonate with you and you would start growing. You'd have a lot of testosterone, which means you would be really pumped up, right? So you'd probably be known for hunting and going to war and being really excited and aggressive and stuff like that. But it would also cause hair to grow all over the place. It would just trigger it. Women as well. This is a real actual picture. These are not AI generated images. I do have some later on that I'll share with you that I created just so that, you know, just to give you a visual. But this is not. This is a real actual photograph of a woman who had hypertrichosis, where the hair grew off of her nose, from her cheeks, off of her forehead. And they weren't seen as monsters at the time, or outcasts. As it became more of a rare occurrence, then yes, they were, you know, people like that would probably end up in the circus or something. But here you have another example where they were being bathed and washed and cleaned and whatnot and taken care of. Here's another one. This one's actually on a building. This guy looks exactly like Chewbacca from Star Wars, which is not lies. Okay, none of these things are lies. I was watching that new series on Netflix, Three Body Problem, and there's a scene that really resonated with me where this one guy is reading a story to this alien through a microphone, like the alien's listening, and he's telling the story. It's like a children's story, and the alien is taking it very literally, and the guy's trying to explain, no, it's not real, it's not true, and the alien's like, so it's a lie? So you're lying? And he's like, yeah, I guess, you know, you could say that. It is kind of a lie. But I disagree. I believe these children's stories, nursery rhymes, our fiction and fantasy, none of them are lies. Every one of them is true. Or as the Bible says, love believes all things. I believe there are elements of truth ingrained within these stories that have survived the test of time. That they've just been cartoonified and slightly changed through perspectives and dialect and accents and languages changing and perspectives and beliefs and all of that over time. Here's another portrait, hand-drawn, of a woman who had hypertrichosis. Beards, right? Some people probably know actual humans these days. This is not rare. I mean, to this degree, it's more rare these days, right? But it's not rare for women to actually grow beards and have little stubble and stuff. And many of you probably have to pluck out, you know, random hairs in different places and stuff because you may, somewhere in your family line, have lineage that traces back to the dog-headed tribe. Which I don't really like calling them that, but that's what the title of the video is, right? Anyways, this one has the caption on the bottom down here. It says, "The boy with the lion's head." So these weren't always, these people, male and female, they weren't always described as dog-headed, as I've talked about before. Sometimes it was the horse-headed tribe, the rat people, it all depends, right? Sometimes they were seen as lions. Interesting, because this kind of could resemble or be a type of the Cowardly Lion from The Wizard of Oz, right? That's all very interesting, the whole story. I have broken down The Wizard of Oz as well. Here's some more examples of people who have hypertrichosis, right? The testosterone floods the body, and you have the typical, and this is actually called werewolf disease. It's affectionately known as the werewolf disease. So these people would have, and it seems reasonable to me to conclude, at least thus far, that they looked like werewolves. That this is where it actually comes from. That they look like little dog people. And I'm just saying that that's probably what the common, description was. I'm not saying I would call them dog people, you know what I mean? But here's an example. You have actual families. This is passed on through genetics, through DNA. Remnants of this. And oftentimes, if you go far back into the past, this wasn't appalling. These people were actually seen as nobles. Why? Because they were said to live for like 200 years or more. Here's another example. This one really reminds me of the Cowardly Lion from The Wizard of Oz. If you put clothing on him, this is basically the Cowardly Lion, right? Over here, this one's spot on, right? Here's another example. This is children are no exception. So you can have children also from the dog-headed tribe, people that were born with hypertrichosis. Now, getting back to the Anode and Cathode Islands. These are all modern images, right? These people do exist still today. Oftentimes when people are born with tails, or when people grow horns, or whenever people, have hypertrichosis, or, werewolf syndrome, or whatever you want to say, if they look different than everybody else, then they want to get rid of that. They want to get rid of their differences instead of bask in those differences and glory in them and really be proud of those differences. They see it as disgusting and gross and bad, but some don't, like these people here. And they really glory in that. And somebody in the chat I saw said Teen Wolf, and you're spot on. That's exactly what I believe the entire movie of Teen Wolf was. It is about a family who has hypertrichosis, basically, right? But if you're from the Anode and Cathode Islands, right, one of them is going to be more positive and male-dominant energy, which is going to produce a lot of that testosterone, etc. But now you have the opposite island to think about, an island that is inhabited mostly by women, right? And we have such records of islands, and I detail this in my book too, all the various examples. But we have many different legends and myths of islands comprised of entirely of women. And on that island, it was said that the island was so energetically charged that all a woman needed to do to become pregnant was to be of age, which if you live hundreds of years would be, not like 13, 14, 15 or whatever, but it would be much older. They would have to be of age, and they could just go into a local stream, because that stream is inundated with that energy too. Or sometimes they were said to become pregnant by the wind because of that energy that resonates with the soul and the body, and it just sparks life and creates virgin birth. So here's where we get to this whole Beauty and the Beast symbolism, right? Where you have an island full of these goddesses who live for hundreds of years. Mostly of women, very beautiful, very feminine. And then you have its counterpart, this other island between the Anode and Cathode of these dog-headed tribe people, mostly of men, right? Now, whenever those beams of energy are shooting up, I would expect that it would mostly be exclusively male and female, and they would have to actually leave their islands and go find mates. But when those beams retract, you still have resonant energy, but it's possible that there would be anomalous births so that you could have females being born on the island of the dog-headed men, I'm just calling it that, and then males that, on occasion, that were born in the island of the beautiful ones, or the feminine island. Right? And this gives you your classic clash between these two family members, between what appear to be a tribe of werewolves, wolfmen, etc., and a beautiful tribe of vampires, or smooth-skinned, etc., who are actually, they go to each other's island and they visit to procreate. And that's what some of these legends indicate to me, is that they would actually go, the females, for example, the Amazonian women, right? The Amazonian women would leave. I have a quote here. Let's see. This is a quote from a book called Myths of the Dogman by David Gordon White, who is an author who wrote this book. And he says, they, the dogmen, are always located far away, beyond neighbors that are close enough to be known as enemies or allies, often over the last known mountain range or body of water. They always belong to another land, live under another sky, live according to other statutes. Dogmen often cohabit and couple with the gynecocratic Amazonians, and speak or bark other tongues. So in this book, this author recognizes that the dogmen cohabited or procreated with the Amazonian women, which would be the other tribe, or the other island, the counterpart to the anode and cathode, right? Here's Beast, by the way. So I got my son watching this this old school X-Men cartoon, so I wanted to also include Beast. So this is Beast of one of the X-Men's, the mutants, right? The whole cartoon, the X-Men, is all about the mutations that occur and the powers that people get, or the gifts that survivors get after the apocalypse, okay? And this is one of them, is, super strength and hypertrichosis, depending on where you are in the world. Where you are in the world has a strong effect on what you're going to look like, what type of, pros and cons you'll have in the world to come, etc. Now, there's also the connection to Krampus, right? So we're talking about the werewolves, wolfmen, versus the vampires. That's usually what it is, right? In all of the horror movies and stuff, you've always have like werewolves versus vampires, but it turns out they're actually family. They're related to one another, right? Even if not physically and directly related to one another. But even Krampus is the counterpart to Santa Claus, who is the elven race. Santa Claus is traditionally an elf and works with the elves, right? Very smooth-skinned, usually kind of Caucasian-looking or whatever, in the modern world. But then he has his counterpart, which is Krampus, which is this hairy giant who goes around and basically kidnaps bad children, possibly to eat them. Right? So why would there even be a correlation? Maybe this isn't as popular in the United States, but in other countries around the world, especially those in the Northern Hemisphere, they know about Krampus, right? And these satyr types of creatures, and their relationship to Santa Claus, which is more of the attractive looking of the tribes, right? So you have all of these furry people, hairy people, but they also have horns. Now, keep in mind that they were said to live for hundreds of years. Once you start getting close to 100, the Bible indicates that 100 years old is basically the end of your childhood. That's how it normally is in a world that is energetically amplified. Is that that you live for a very long time. So, for example, puberty doesn't hit so early. It's way further along. And people, I would be considered a child compared to immortals, compared to people that live for 1,000 years. I haven't even reached 10% of my life, if I were to live for 1,000 years, right? But there's these different stages of puberty. And you'll notice that they have tails, right? Sometimes they'll put tails on the dog-headed people, sometimes they don't, etc. But Krampus and these wild men having horns is something that humans do. And if you look up humans with real horns, or real pictures of humans with horns, not prosthetics, not, people getting surgery to make themselves look like they have horns, real people with actual real horns, they're almost always elderly. Because they're approaching the end of their childhood, and they're starting, their bodies remember that there's another stage of puberty that kicks in, and they start to grow horns. And there's other stages of puberty as well. And I know some of these are more grotesque, you know what I mean, if we look at them, because we're not used to seeing that. Also keep in mind that we live during a time of exponentially increasing entropy, and that energy is being sucked and siphoned out of the surface world where we live. So the things that once would be very beautiful, like if you had like two perfect little tiny stubby horns, or I don't know, you might not find that beautiful or whatever, but I'm just saying, like, you would, in this age, you might have more grotesque looking horns that grow in strange ways and they're deformed and stuff. But in the world to come, you would not. In the world to come, it would be more, in tune with nature, I guess you could say, and you would have more, prettier looking horns. Okay, they don't have to be all grotesque and nasty and stuff. But I imagine that's why they look that way in this age, because we die before we even get through puberty, our natural stage of puberty, right? Being that we are all children. If you're not over 100 right now, I consider you to be a child. According to my studies and my research, and me just being honest about myself, I'm a child. And I don't want to lose my childlike innocence just because, society insists that I grow up and get a job and be an adult and this and that and just accept your short lifespan. I do not. I'm looking for the fountain of youth. I'm looking to extend my life for hundreds of years because there's so many wonders and treasures to behold in the world. So many interesting and strange things. Now let's get back to the werewolves versus the vampires, the families, the different classes. So you could have like anode and cathode, right, respectively. They can shift as well, by the way. These are cartoonified versions of these. These are for horror, right? These are just remnants from our collective subconscious. But look at the names, right? These are those who rule, or of those who rule. You have amp right there, which is related to energy, but the umpires, the empire, etc., right? And then you have the lichens. Another word for werewolf is lichen. The root of lichen is luke, or, depending on your dialect, loop, or loof sometimes as well, right? Loof, or luke, etc., right? Anyways, the word luke means light. The word like, this right here, L-Y-C, that's the root of lichen, which basically means werewolf. Like means light. Luke means light. Lucian, lichen, these things mean of the light. Beings who are from a light. Beams of light. Terrestrial beams of light that shoot up into the sky, which change the life of its inhabitants, of the people who live on those islands, right? Lichens. Now, if you put of the, which is this V right here, or this is a Vav, or it means of the in Hebrew, we'll say, of the lichens is Vulcan, or Vulcan. Oh, interesting. So many connections. So many connections to what we thought was fiction and what we thought was fantasy. Why do we suppose that the elves have pointed ears, or that the werewolves, typically they also have really long pointed ears, etc.? Because these are the parts of our bodies that continue to grow even after puberty. Sometimes, even after death. Like ears will just continue to grow. Noses will continue to grow. That's why you tend to have like this sort of a goblin kind of elven look. to immortals the older they get. You know what I mean? This is the new Spock, by the way, if you're wondering who this is. This is Spock from Star Trek, who is a Vulcan, or of the Lycans. So when he goes through puberty, when he doesn't have all this beard and stuff like that, that's just the young version of the same humanoid. It's an immortal, right? But if you allow him to go through another stage of puberty, he starts to grow hair and a beard, and people don't typically see Spock so hairy. But I find it interesting, right? So you have a connection between those who are on one island, a mysterious, mythic, and legendary island that is male dominant in energy, or energetically male dominant, right? And another one that is energetically female dominant. And they match. They match with one another. They're both immortals. They want to procreate with other immortals. They don't want to come to the Southlands out here where children live and procreate with a child. That would probably be against their moral code, I would assume, right? So the Amazonians, the women, they go by many names. They're not just Amazonians, but that's the most popular of the island of all females. Hey, thanks for the support, everybody. Super appreciate you. They would go and they would mate. They would get mates from the other islands, right? So we have the werewolves that would mate with the vampires, or the vampiric race, the beautiful ones, the Azir versus the Vanir, right? If you're looking at like Norse mythology, Vanir basically means beautiful, or the beautiful ones, right? The Azir versus the Vanir. This is also the symbolism of so many people. Like, this is from Cabin in the Woods, which is another awesome movie that I broke down. This is one of my favorite horror movies ever. I love this one because it has like everything. But there's this scene where this beautiful woman goes and she makes out with like the bust, like this head. It's not like alive, it's just like a head of a wolf on the wall, and she just starts making out with it. This is symbolic. This is what it's showing us. That the Amazonians, like Wonder Woman is an Amazonian. She's basically a goddess, okay? Now, they're not full gods. They're not completely immortal because they don't live at the middle. If they lived in the middle, they wouldn't look like, you know, dog people, and they wouldn't be Amazonians or anything. They would be the immortals that live in the center of the world, right? Which are completely different. These live outside of the center of the world. Wonder Woman, like I said, is another example. She's famously from the Amazonian tribe. She wears this little eagle symbol. This is actually just the Vav. It's a Vav too, but this is the beam of light that shoots up and splits out on the sides, becomes the phoenix, or the bird of creation, the cosmic bird, etc. That's why she has these Vavs down here. She's got the triple Vav. See, VVV down here. That's because of the three beams of light, the anode, cathode, and Mount Meru, shooting and spiraling up into the sky. And then they actually branch off at the top, creating the actual form of the ancient Vav, which looks more like a Y, or a T, or a cross, or something like that. So you have three of those, which is like Jesus in the middle, and then you have like the repentant thief on one hand, and then you have the evil thief or sinner or whatever on the other side. That's the anode and cathode with Mount Meru in the middle. Hey, thanks for gifting a membership, Joshua, in the chat. That was awesome. So here's a Wonder Woman, right? The Amazons, the Amazonians, they went by many different names. There's different examples of these too. Now here's another cartoonified example from the Addams Family. The whole story of the Addams Family TV show and movies and stuff, they harken back to ancient truths. That's why, you know, some people who are into like gothic things and horror and stuff like that, that's why we like that kind of stuff, because we recognize there's truth in it. So you have Cousin It, right? It's all hairy, just overgrown with hair, and he falls in love with this, you know, smooth-skinned woman or whatever. The Wolfman and the wife of the Wolfman, the stories of the X-Men Beast and his wife or girlfriend or whatever. Monty Python has a classic example of the island of only women, where man, I forget who was this. One of the knights, was it Galahad? I can't remember. Anyways, one of the knights of the Round Table is looking for, you know, the cup of Christ. And on his way, he encounters this castle. Now, castles are symbolic for these plasma volcanoes. They're towers. Okay, that's basically what they are. That's if you look at the etymology of castle, it comes from tower or tor or tree is another way of saying that, which is a mountain shape, a towering, lofty mountain shape, a very tall mountainous structure. And these castles inside of them contain princesses, or Sophia, which is really what this is called. It's kind of getting more Gnostic or whatever. But anyways, he visits this island of all females. It's called Castle Anthrax. And on it, all they want to do is procreate. They're like, oh my God, it's a man. And they're like, hey, sleep with me. No, sleep with me. Okay, fine, sleep with me after. I'll be next, right? And it makes sense if you understand that that's during a time whenever that beam of energy has retracted. They can no longer just get pregnant by the wind or wading in a stream, and they need a man now in order to give birth. And one stumbles on in, and there are many stories. As a matter of fact, I'll share one with you right now. I have gone over many travelogues on our adventures here on my channel. Let's see, do I have it here? I don't know if I wrote it down. It's in my book. But anyways, there's a travelogue called The Adventures of John Mandeville. And this explorer talks about how he went to this island that had all these women. He took his men, and there was all these women, and the women are enticing to the men. They want the men to stay there. They want to sleep with the men. It's not just because they're promiscuous or whatever, but it's because they need to continue the heritage. They need to, have the other side. They need to have the equation. You know what I'm saying? All right. Anyways, there's also the travelogue, The Voyages of the Maelduin, which is an ancient Irish one. Now, these are all the AI images. I just sort of, for your viewing pleasure. The Voyages of the Maelduin, they describe how they, these ancient Irish explorers visited these strange islands that I believe are located in the far north. Right? Some islands had gigantism, other islands had, different strange things and anomalies, but one of them had all these women, all of these beautiful young women that basically invited them to stay the night and sleep in their beds and not leave. And on that island, the women told the men who were outsiders, okay, if you stay here, you'll stop aging. You'll remain the same age that you have always been. So stay with us. There's no reason to leave. We can make families. We can just stay here. We, the women, don't have to leave and get on boats and go looking for men to kidnap them or entice them or whatever. We got you. You might as well stay here with us, right? I just put the horns on, vampires and all that fun stuff. But these are where these legends come from. And this might be why there are some women out there that will see that they're like, they want a hairy man. You know what I mean? If I'm being honest. Some don't. Some, they like them all shaved and clean skinned and everything's all very feminine or whatever. And there's reasons for that. And it doesn't mean it's right or wrong. But these preferences come from somewhere. An actual historic truth, genetically speaking. And some women are old-fashioned in that sense, and they like a hairy beast of a man. And that's nice hairy chest and all that stuff, right? And like I said, it's not good or bad. However, I will say this. If you're a woman and you see that, and you come across a human that has the actual head of an actual dog, like, you know what I mean? Are you sexually aroused? Now, I will also say, I recognize we live in a messed up world during crazy times right now. So there's probably people that raise their hand and say, yeah, totally. Like I showed that there's people who got married to actual dogs and stuff like that. Those are anomalies. Those are exceptions. I'm not talking about that. I'm saying in general, or monkeys, right? If you saw a monkey, a bunch of orangutans or baboons or whatever that were dressed up in human clothing, are you going to be all excited? Probably not, is what I'm guessing and hoping, right? I'm hoping you're not, right? This for some reason deep down is more appealing than that is. And there's good, real, like, reason to that. There's real substance to it. You know what I mean? So, deep down inside, I don't believe that ancient humans would have looked at baboons and seen dog-headed people, the tribes of the dog heads, etc., that they saw humans walking around, but they have dogs' heads. Oh, how weird. No. I feel they were intelligent enough, and probably more intelligent than we are today, to recognize that those are animals. That they would not trade with them, that they would not dress them up in fine clothing, etc. And I definitely don't believe that they actually had the heads of dogs, right? Now, speaking of the dogs, I'm reminded of the biblical quotes. Now, I'm going to go over some of these quotes real quick, right? So, my theory is that the island of the dog-headed people are those who have hypertrichosis, and possibly some other physical conditions that have changed them a bit so that they were dubbed such. However, let's check out some quotes that I have here. And I've included all of these and more in my next book that I'm coming out with. We have... King Arthur was said to have gone to war and fought against the dog-headed tribe. It says here, on the mountain of Aden, which is probably Eden, one of the mountains of Eden, King Arthur fought with dog heads. By the 100 they fell. They fell by the 100 before Bedivere, which is Bedivere, the Perfect. And that is from the book Pagur, the 9th century Welsh poem. Let's see what else we have here. Marco Polo, the Venetian explorer, says, in the face they are all just like big mastiff dogs. They have a quantity of spices, but they are most cruel as a generation, and they eat everybody that they can catch, if not their own race. They live on flesh and rice and milk, and have fruits different from any of ours. And that's from his book, Il Milione. This next one is from the Talmud. This is a prophecy that says, the face of the last generation, before the return of the Messiah, will have the face of a dog. That's from the Talmud Sota 49b. The book of Revelation says, outside of New Jerusalem, which I believe is at the center of the world. Outside of New Jerusalem are the dogs, those who practice magic arts, the sexually immoral, the murderers, the idolaters, and everyone who loves and practices falsehood. Just outside of New Jerusalem, which is where we would expect to find those Anode and Cathode islands, subsequent powerful places, or places of power, as I like to call them. Now, are they actual dogs practicing magic? No, they're people. Are the people just called dogs because God really hates dogs and he's a cat person? No. It's because they have an appearance that looks like this. In Philippians chapter 3, verse 2, it says, watch out for those dogs, those evildoers, the mutilators of the flesh. They were cannibalistic, remember. Not all, but in general, they were known to partake of human flesh. The first to come out was red, and his whole body was like a hairy garment, and so they named him Esau. That is from the Bible in the book of Genesis, chapter 25, verse 25, where you have the classic tale of Jacob and Esau. Jacob was smooth-skinned. Esau came out as a hairy beast. Red, tinted, swarthy, you could say. A hairy red creature, or humanoid. Why? Why was he born hairy? You have these twins, right? The twins represent anode and cathode, almost every time. So it can be two boys, it can be two girls or whatever, but one is always masculine, dominant, or evil, portrayed as being evil or whatever. The other one's usually good or beautiful or whatnot, right? Usually it's a male and then a female, or an Adam and an Eve, etc., right? You have a Romulus and a Remus. They're twins almost all the time, because those beams of light that shoot out they look the same, basically, right? Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks? Says Goliath, the giant of Canaan, or 1 Samuel 17, verse 43. I think that was pretty much it. Let me just check. I think I have some more pictures at the end here I did want to show you. I do. So, the protruding mouths, right? I actually took a note on the protruding mouths, because you'll notice that oftentimes they're actually shown as having these muzzles or mouths that protrude. This is similar. I found it interesting that that's how cavemen are often depicted, right? And I'm not one that really believes in evolution as it's traditionally taught. If anything, I believe it's backwards, and that humans can change into animals, and they actually go backwards and revert or whatnot. But without any of those politics, you can see that they draw these cavemen as having like protruding mouths. And the word for that is prognatism or prognatism. So these are just, whatever artist conceptions of like cavemen and stuff, but I wanted to use them to give you a visual. Imagine this guy if he had hypertrichosis. I mean, he already kind of has hair all over the place and his eyebrows are very bushy and stuff, but let's just say he was full blown, has werewolf disease, right? And looks more like this, with more of a protruding mouth, sticking out on the bottom like that. Then you would have more of like the horse face or rat face or dog face, or something that would be called that by common people who didn't know any better at the time. Even the Sphinx has a same or similar type of appearance if you look at the Sphinx from the side view, right? It has like this sort of protruding jaw, and if the nose was there, I feel like it might even look similar to that. And the Sphinx is sort of lying down like, an animal would or something. Also, this is probably where we get like the myths and legends of the big bad wolf, that these are all actual story form truths, right? The big bad wolf wearing human clothes, a top hat. Why would you wear a top hat unless you had a big elongated skull? Which is where the top hat, I believe, actually came from, right? Just like the Phrygian caps and wizard caps and princess hats and witch hats and all of that. They have the people that originally wore those had really elongated skulls. Or Little Red Riding Hood. Now, did you know in some of the original versions of Little Red Riding Hood, at the end, right, you have this wolf that's dressed up like grandma, right? I mean, how else can you pretend to be grandma if you have an actual wolf that's in bed? You know what I mean? First of all, it's not going to talk. It's not going to be convincing as anybody's grandmother or a human of any kind. You're obviously going to see, why is there a dog in the bed, right? And I know some people would be like, oh, it's just a story. Well, I don't believe it's just a story. I believe it's just history. That it's historic record that's just been cartoonified and slightly changed over time. But if we see that this is somebody that had hypertrichosis, and maybe like perhaps they shaved some of it away to try to like trick this girl or something, but they were called the wolf, and they dressed up and they put on the grandmother's clothing and stuff like that. Now, the story actually starts to make more sense of how that could possibly happen. Here's that quote from the Bible talking about the places that exist just outside of New Jerusalem, which I believe to be in the center of the world at the North Pole, outside of the dogs, the sorcerers, the sexually immoral, the murderers, the idolaters, and everyone who practices, loves and practices falsehood. Now, I talked about how the dogmen were said to wear the symbol of the bull, which is probably a circle with a couple of horns coming right up out of it, right? Not like an entire body of a bull or anything, but Just, it could be a goat, it could be a bull, it could be anything, but it's basically an animal, a circle that has horns that come up out of it, right? And that harkens back to the shape in the sky that was seen up in the north, towards where the North Star today is, right? That there is this doom shape, which I have discussed in my Plasma Apocalypse playlist, right? There was this doom shape up in the sky. It's a part of the firmament, and it lights up, and it goes through its own cycles and stuff like that. And as a part of that, it has a crescent shape underneath it. And so at times, it can actually look like a circular object or a face that has these horns or this crescent shape on it. And they worshipped that because there was energy that came down from that. And that is our presentation. Dogmen, tribe of the dog-headed people. I hope I see lots of comments on this one. I had a blast, and I want to say thanks for all the support, for all the people that support me. I had one of my viewers send me this awesome little envelope with a nice message and their own support to my P.O. box. I have like a fan mail, a P.O. box. The address is on my community tab. Please go check out my website. Okay, I'm all finished actually uploading to my esoteric library. And I'm going to unveil that here pretty soon. I mean, you already have access to it, but it's over 10,000 volumes of esoteric literature, maps, arcane writings, scriptures, stuff that's hundreds and hundreds of years old. And I haven't even got to all of it yet. You can download all of them in PDF format and check them out and keep them for yourself on my website. And there's a free trial for 24 hours. So you don't even have to be a member. You could just go do a cram session on my website. If you're interested in buying my first book, Ancient Oblivion, The Plasma Apocalypse, that's really my Cliff's Notes versions, all on everything that you can expect when the Plasma Apocalypse happens, why it happens, how it's going to affect all life on this world. And I would like to thank everybody. I believe I have met, or am extremely close to meeting, my donation goal for the pre-sales for my next book. And I'm finishing that book up right now. I'm just working on the last chapter and then getting some pictures and figuring out how to like add all the pictures to it and stuff. That book, this next one, is called Return to Hyperborea. Both of them are Ancient Oblivion as a series. This one is Return to Hyperborea, and it is all about the Anode and Cathode Islands, what I call the Hyperborean electrical arc theory, Mount Meru, the Garden of Eden, the Four Rivers, etc., and so on and so forth. I really get into detail on that. There should be a link in the description in this video. If you want to actually go, click on the link. It'll show you some of the chapters that you can expect to see and stuff. And if you'd like to make a donation to help with my efforts to get it published and just, help me keep my bills paid and stuff, you can do that there as well. Thanks so much for watching. Until next time, I'm JayDreamerZ saying good vibes and goodbye.
But something's forcing me to stay. Come